What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here with a look at the 10-game Week 10 slate here in the NFL on DraftKings and FanDuel. We have 6 games in the 1 p.m. window, 4 in the 4 p.m. window, so a little bit more of a balanced slate this week than last week. As always, I like to look at some of the information that we can glean from betting markets to inform some of the decisions we can make on each and every single slate. And on this one, there are 4 large favorites to talk about right off the jump here. First things first, Rachaad White is once again one of my favorite plays at running back at any position really on this slate. Just $5,800 here on DraftKings and a really affordable $7,000 over on FanDuel. Rachaad White's Bucks favored by 2 points at home against the Tennessee Titans. We've seen White maintain a very healthy role in the passing game for Baker Mayfield's Buccaneers, and I expect that to continue here in this very big game for the Buccaneers. Rachaad White going to be the first man in the majority of my lineups this weekend. 4 big favorites on this slate, the biggest of which are the Dallas Cowboys, favored by 17.5 points right now against the New York Giants, who briefly got Daniel Jones back last week, but unfortunately he's going to miss the rest of the season here with a torn ACL, which means they are turning to third-string quarterback and rookie Tommy DeVito to lead them into this battle with the Cowboys here, and betting markets rightfully have pegged this one as an ugly one. In the Occupy model, we have him at 19% on DraftKings right now here on Thursday afternoon, 22% on FanDuel, which is number 1 on the FanDuel slate, and we have him at the highest ownership at 42% over on Yahoo for those of you who play over there. Now, I think flat out we want to get exposure to Tony Pollard in this really juicy matchup against the New York Giants. They have a very poor run defense. They're a little better defending running backs in the passing game, but this is not a game that's going to go the Giants' way here. Betting markets are all over this with Dallas favored by over 2 touchdowns. The biggest risk with Pollard is something that we have seen all season long, that he is not necessarily getting all of the running back opportunities. Some of the backups on the Cowboys will mix in throughout the majority of this game. And beyond that, if the betting markets are correct about the way this game is going to go, there's significant concern late in the second half, maybe late in the third quarter into the fourth quarter, if Dallas is on schedule and winning by the expected amount of points here, that Cooper Rush and the backup unit of offensive skill players actually sub in. So if Pollard has not met value by a little over half of this game, he may actually be at risk of being subbed out and not hitting value at all. So that is something to be aware of as you build high-risk, large field lineups, specifically here in week number 10. Tony Pollard definitely will be at risk of being subbed out if the Cowboys are on schedule. Hopefully, if they're on schedule, that means that he did enough to get over the goal line, both figuratively and literally here in week number 10 in the National Football League. Baltimore Ravens, Seattle Seahawks, and the Cincinnati Bengals are all favored by 6.5 points in betting markets this weekend. So first running back that we need to talk about in that situation is Kenneth Walker III. Walker has slowly but surely been ceding more work to Zach Charbonnet in this backfield. We see just 9 carries last week in a blowout loss. 8 carries in a relatively neutral game script against the Cleveland Browns in week number 8. Pretty concerning for Walker's volume. And Walker's facing a Commanders defense that actually ranks pretty good defending running backs against the run. They're inside the top 10 in the NFL this season. So Walker, probably just a high-risk play here at running back in week number 10, anywhere you can play. Same goes for Baltimore's Gus Edwards, who has been a touchdown machine in recent weeks. Now Edwards is facing the Browns defense, one of the better defenses in the league overall, and not any different against the running game specifically. One of the top-ranked units in the league defending running backs. So Edwards is definitely in line to have a tough time scoring 2 touchdowns on 5 touches once again here in week number 10. I don't think I would side with that. Some regression that we want to avoid in fantasy football potentially coming for Gus the Bus here against Cleveland. Joe Mixon's Cincinnati Bengals favored by 6.5 against the Houston Texans this week. And I do think this is a spot that we want to be interested in at $6,200 here on DraftKings. A little bit more expensive, $7,700 over on FanDuel. Mixon hasn't really had a true ceiling game just yet, but with all of the reports that the Bengals are actually suffering some injuries at wide receiver, it looks like the Bengals are at risk of missing at least one of their star receivers in this game, which may mean they have to lean more on Mixon, the tight ends, and some of the backup wide receivers here. So it could be a script that we want to be on Joe Mixon, and the field agrees. Right now, we have Joe Mixon as the most popular running back play on the board on DraftKings at 22%, and he will be a healthy 17% owned on FanDuel as of Thursday afternoon. Puts him well inside the low-risk group of running backs that we want to consider on this slate. So the big three for me at running back is going to be Tony Pollard of the Dallas Cowboys, Joe Mixon, the Cincinnati Bengals, and Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who is still underpriced for the role that he has on this Buccaneers offense. That's enough on running back. Where's the field going on quarterback on this slate? We've had a couple of slates in a row where it's been a pay-up week at quarterback. We've seen the field use Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts in the $8,000 range. We have the Lions and the Chargers on the board with the highest total this Sunday at 48 points. Detroit's Jared Goff's number 2 in the Occupy model this week at quarterback. Justin Herbert from the Chargers, number 5 in the Occupy model at quarterback. Projected ownership actually has these guys pretty low, which means they're going to be great tournament plays, not necessarily strong low-risk plays here. Same goes for Lamar Jackson, who, despite being at the top of the salary table, and despite being at the top of our model this week, is looking to be just 4% owned on DraftKings, 6% owned on FanDuel. I think Jackson's Ravens, once again, probably good tournament play here against a pretty tough Browns pass defense here in week number 10. The field is going to be actually paying down a little bit at quarterback this week, and it does look like Joe Mixon's signal caller, Joe Burrow, is going to be the most popular play at the quarterback position anywhere that you can play here in week number 10. So I think Joe Burrow is the go-to low-risk quarterback this week. We can look at the other projections in large field tournaments for ownership. Washington and Seattle, both sides of this game. How about Sam Howell here? Howell has the second most passing yards in the NFL this year through 9 weeks of play, right behind Tua Tagovailoa. Very, very pass-happy offense for the Commanders, and that is why Howell's probably going to catch quite a bit of ownership here at a reasonable price on both DraftKings and FanDuel. And then the favored side, Geno Smith's Seahawks are going to be probably very heavily stacked in large field tournaments. He's going to be the second most popular play on both DraftKings and FanDuel at quarterback. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to go through the rest with Burrow as my low-risk quarterback. But we know if we have to make some other skill players fit, that we have the luxury of being able to drop down from Burrow to some of the more popular plays in the high 5,000s here on DraftKings with Sam Howell and Geno Smith. Now, at the wide receiver position, we know that the Chargers and the Lions have the highest total. Amon-Ra St. Brown, going to be the highest ranked wide receiver in the Occupy model this week. Going to be a healthy 15% owned in DraftKings tournaments, 17% owned in FanDuel tournaments. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown makes the most sense for low-risk lineups this week as your pay up at the wide receiver position. St. Brown has had a 16-point floor this season in PPR, and the targets have been absolutely astronomical week in and week out with Jared Goff under center. I see no reason for that to change here. And instead of investing in the rather uncertain committee backfield between Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, you can lock in what we perceive to be relatively safe production in the passing game with Amon-Ra St. Brown and get his 10-plus targets that we expect. The Occupy model actually projects him for over 11 targets, most on the board this week. So we want to maximize targets in low-risk contests and probably in high-risk contests as well, with the Lions expected to have participation in the highest total game on the board this week. There are a couple of values at wide receiver that I think are really good this week. I'll be curious to see where the field actually nets out on them. I think we're a little lower on their ownership projections right now. Rookie first-round pick Jackson Smith-Njigba has seen his targets slowly increase. We've seen 7 targets in 2 out of the last 3 games. Obviously, his fantasy point production has been bolstered by a couple of touchdowns, but with JSN now averaging double-digit fantasy points in 3 consecutive games and his salary actually going down from last week, that's going to be an interesting play that can make things work. Probably more so in tournaments than low risk, seeing where ownership is, but JSN on my radar, especially in a game that we like for stacks in high-risk tournaments. Got to keep an eye on this questionable tag because he's got a hip injury this week, but if he plays, JSN going to be in a pretty good spot to succeed here. And like JSN, a player involved in one of the game stack environments I'm most interested in, Noah Brown from the Houston Texans has had 5+ targets in every single game since he returned from injured reserve. Obviously, last week was the blow-up game for the entire Houston Texans offense. Brown, just $3,700 here on DraftKings and $5,400 over on FanDuel. If Robert Woods misses again here in week number 10, Brown, the clear wide receiver 3 in this offense, he's going to run a healthy amount of routes. He'll be out there nearly as often as each of Dell and Nico Collins, and you can get to him at a fraction of the cost. So I think he's a really interesting play as well if we're looking for salary savers to make other things fit. As far as value is concerned in the Occupy model, to me that's wide receivers 5,000 or less on DraftKings, 6,000 or less on FanDuel. The model likes Christian Watson from the Green Bay Packers as the best play in this salary tier. Probably more of a tournament play given that he's going to be just 2% on DraftKings, 4% on FanDuel. Ownership in this range is going to be on JSN, who I just talked about, Rondale Moore from the Arizona Cardinals, Michael Thomas from the New Orleans Saints, and Michael Wilson if he returns to the Cardinals lineup. These are going to be some of the more popular plays in this range to make lineups fit. But seeing nobody here projected over 10%, JSN right on that line, what this tells me is that the field is actually going to be on more mid-range price wide receivers this week than the cheaper ones. So we're going to have to actually bump the salary table up a little bit and look at just highest to lowest projected ownership wide receivers. And we see actually the majority of the high-owned wide receivers on DraftKings are in that $5,000 to $5,500 range. Those wide receivers this week are going to be Marquise Brown, the Arizona Cardinals. Deontay Johnson finally got into the end zone last week of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Tank Dell got into the end zone twice last week for the Houston Texans. At least two of these guys will probably be in the majority of the low-risk and or cash lineups that you see this week on DraftKings. Over on FanDuel, pretty close. Looks like the only one that'll be lower owned is Deontay Johnson because he's going to be $7,000 over there. So just in a completely different salary tier on the FanDuel side of things here. He's seen 6+ targets in every week since returning from injured reserve. Got in the end zone last week, had a 14-target game in a trailing game script against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and now has a pretty friendly matchup against the Green Bay Packers here in week number 10. So I think he's my favorite one to use in a low-risk lineup here on DraftKings. The tight end position, looking at the Occupy model, Trey McBride, not only our top-ranked tight end for the Arizona Cardinals, is going to be the highest owned across the board on DraftKings and FanDuel. McBride's running a ton of routes for this Cardinals offense. We can ignore the somewhat low performance last week to a degree because Clayton Tune under center for the Cardinals was just a disaster against the Browns' top-ranked pass defense. And the thing that McBride is going to benefit from, the field is all over this. Trey McBride, well worth, I think, buying the ownership, especially in low risk, because we're going to see Kyler Murray return under center for the Arizona Cardinals. That should elevate this offense, even if Murray's not close to the player that we knew a couple years ago when he was operating at full throttle. He's definitely going to be better than Clayton Tune, who could not even perform at all against a tough Browns defense last week, admittedly, so credit to Mr. Tune for the attempt. But Murray should elevate Trey McBride and all the pieces in this offense, and hopefully we see Arizona at least compete enough for McBride to give us a performance closer to what he had against the Baltimore Ravens with Joshua Dobbs in week number 8. McBride value at $3,500. At defense, looking at the Occupy model, the field is going to be deploying McBride's Cardinals the heaviest this week. The Cowboys, favored by 1,000,000 points against the New York Giants, will be right behind them. And the Detroit Lions against the Chargers will be the third most popular defense as of right now. So I will go with Arizona's defense just to prove the point here in low risk that we can definitely find a lineup that fits here with one of those value wide receivers I talked about earlier in the video, Jackson Smith-Njigba or Noah Brown to round things out. I do think this is where low risk ultimately nets out here in week number 10 on DraftKings and also over here on FanDuel as well. I do think this is where the low risk builds are somewhat this week for you FanDuel players. Now let's talk about high risk. This week, one of my favorite offenses to stack is actually the San Francisco 49ers. They're at the top of my rankings this week in their matchup with the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's a modest total. It's one of the higher ones of the week, 44.5 points. San Francisco themselves are the 5th highest implied team total on the board. But what I really like about this game is Brock Purdy, Brandon Ayuk. We do have Deebo Samuel slated to return, which throws a wrench into things here. But I think you can get away with a 2-1 here. Ayuk, Deebo, George Kittle. And then the clear bringback in my mind is a little bit of a pivot at the tight end position. Instead of playing Trey McBride alongside the field, you can get a tight end that is seeing a ton of targets, that is a few $100 more in Evan Engram, and get a really nice floor and ceiling combination here. 7+ targets in every single game since the first week of the NFL season. Haven't necessarily seen the fantasy points come along with that. Haven't seen a touchdown for Evan Engram at all this season yet. Got to be due to get in the box here soon. So I like Evan Engram as a bringback in San Francisco 49er stacks. Houston and Cincinnati would be at the top of my board, But I think with the uncertainty at wide receiver for the Cincinnati Bengals, we're just going to have to take this into Friday evening before the Daily Plug publishes formally to see exactly where we net out there. But Chase, Boyd, if he's the number 2 wide receiver, if one of those starters is out, is definitely an interesting play. If both of Chase and Higgins miss, then we have to consider Andrei Yosevich, have to consider the tight ends from the Bengals as all underpriced, and maybe we end up with an NBA-style underpriced Bengals stack that actually includes the running back, depending on how things go here. So this is going to be a little bit messy. Can't necessarily endorse a Cincinnati stack right now. We can obviously endorse the Houston stacks, which are what you needed last week. Ownership is going to be on the side of it potentially being there. We can get Stroud here at quarterback. We can get Tank Dell, who's going to be a popular play in low-risk lineups. Noah Brown, who I think is one of the better values at wide receiver. Dalton Schultz, once again here at tight end, definitely an option in lineups this week. Schultz is going to be not as highly owned as he was last week, but still one of the top 5 tight ends in the Occupy model this week. Plenty of ways to double or triple stack CJ Stroud like last week. Once again, I don't know if that's going to happen again, but also cheap bringbacks from Cincinnati. Going with the mix and chalk at running back, hoping all the scoring comes through the running back is definitely an option. And then, of course, Tyler Boyd, especially with Higgins out of the lineup, if that's what we get, would be an interesting pass catcher bring back there as well. Washington at Seattle. If Howell and Geno Smith are going to be the second and third most popular quarterbacks of the week on DraftKings, then obviously it's going to be one of the game stacks we have to be interested in because it's definitely what our opponents are going to be invested in. We can get Sam Howell at quarterback. We can play McLaurin, Jahan Dotson. With Seattle, we could use a value in JSN, but there's enough salary here for us to consider Metcalf or Lockett as the bringbacks here as well, because we know we have a cheap tight end play that the field is pretty heavily invested in this week, and playing the most expensive wide receiver option here with Seattle allows us to use that tight end. So that's on the board, and you can flip that around and do that with the Seattle side as well. Let's just play it out for you. Washington, we can go with McLaurin, and now we definitely have enough salary even to go with that cheap tight end that's going to be pretty popular. So this is how the field is playing the slate this week. I do think relatively straightforward. Just to wrap things up on the FanDuel side of things, I still like this San Francisco Jacksonville stack quite a bit. Plenty of salary to make something work. Going with a 2-1 there with the 49ers and the Jaguars. Some of the popular plays. There's some value wide receivers you can use to make this work. So that's week number 10 of the NFL season. 10 games on this slate, 6 in the early window, 4 in the late window. What are some of your favorite plays that I missed on this video? I'd be happy to answer any questions in the comments here. If you like the video, we'd appreciate a thumbs up. We know that those of you that are subscribed to the channel are enjoying the content. For those of you that are not subscribed, really appreciate it if you could click that subscribe button. We know it helps us. We're not going to lie to you about that. It helps you get notified when we have anything coming out about any DFS sports that you are interested in. We've got a lot of videos coming out about the NBA now, pretty much every single day. Pre-lock live streams about the NBA. The team has been crushing it there. We have these NFL main slate videos once a week. We have a live NFL tournament show with Brian and Moose on the weekends. There's a lot of stuff that you definitely want to make sure you're getting notified about when those are announced and scheduled. And we appreciate your time watching these videos as well. As always, good luck here in week number 10 of the NFL season. I hope to see you back next week, same time, same place, for week number 11.